everyone viewing this video. My name is James Guffey, and I am a professor of criminal justice administration at National University, which is in La Jolla, California. Today I'm making this video recording here in my home for the virtual conference presented by the Academic and Business Research Institute for their virtual fall conference of 2021, and I am submitting this on October 15th, 2021. And the topic, the direction of my presentation today is a critical analysis of defunding the police movement, ramifications and recommendations for police reform in the 21st century. So what does defund the police mean? Well, the best definition I could come up with was by Boynton, and he gives perhaps the best definition of what is meant by protesters decrying defund the police. He basically says it's a reallocation of some policing costs toward mental health, addiction treatment, and social services while reframing the role of police themselves, particularly in the Black and indigenous communities. The literature identifies 10 U.S. cities that were the first to proclaim that they were going to defund the police. So in the next few slides, I have tables that show the cities, their defund amount, and violent crime increase for the years 2020 to 2021. So before I begin describing the tables here, let me give you a caveat of sorts. The data I'm going to have over here in the last column, the crime increase column, is going to be a pretty good summation. But the caveat is that in the year 2020, the FBI moved from the Uniform Crime Report for reporting crimes in the United States to something called NAIBRS, which stands for the National Incident-Based Reporting System. So this switchover from the UCR to the NAIBRS in 2020 really makes the reported crime for particularly 2020 somewhat questionable, I have to say. First of all, the UCR, 98% of the police agencies in the U.S. reported to the UCR. Unfortunately, when the NAIBRS went into effect in 2020, that went down to 53% only reporting. And the reason was, not to get too much into the detail with that, but to give you some background on why these figures may be, not perfect, so to speak, is that, the low amount of agencies reporting to the FBI in the NAIBRS system. So with that in mind now, let's go to Baltimore PD, which was certainly one of the 10 that defunded. They defunded in the amount of $22 million. And Baltimore is on pace to experience more than 300 homicides for the 7th year in a row. That's pretty significant. Chicago PD. It's really undetermined, the amount. They didn't, the city council and the mayor didn't really come out and say an exact amount. But what they did say they were going to do is they were going to defund by attrition. In other words, not filling vacant positions. And that, that's just as bad as coming out with a figure. Not filling positions means that the manpower available in the Chicago Police Department is going to start going down, and how far it goes down, who knows. So according to the most 2020-2021 data from the FBI, the total crime rate in Chicago is 3,925.8 per 100,000 people. Now that's all of the Part 1 crimes bundled together there, that almost 4,000 per 100,000 people. So that's a 58.51% higher than the national rate of 2476.7 and 74.22% higher than the rest of Illinois at 2253.4. So a significant jump in crime in Chicago. And we've seen that on the national news as well. Los Angeles PD, 175 million. The numbers of murders and shootings reported in the city of Los Angeles continues to outpace violent crime. Violent crimes recorded in 2019 and 2020, 141 in 2021 as of the 1st of October of this year, which is a 22% increase over 2020. Okay, next agency, one that obviously we are all familiar with, sort of the kickoff of this defund the police movement. We all know what happened in Minneapolis. Minneapolis has declared that they will cut the police budget by $8 million. In the first 3 quarters of 2021, there have been 503 people injured by gunfire in the city of Minneapolis. This is an increase of 25% over 2021. Homicides are up 16%, robberies up 5%, aggravated assault up 2.6%. New York PD has declared a $1 billion defund. Can't imagine that's the size of that figure. And for the month of August of 2021, the number of murders and shootings declined compared with August of 2020. So here's an outlier. New York PD is definitely an outlier. They've declared a significantly large defund, but it doesn't seem to have affected their, violent crime rate like it has other cities. Oakland, California PD, defund amount $14.6 million. The Oakland PD announced a 140% increase in violent crimes from January 2020 to January 2021. There were 159 shootings in 2021 versus 79 in 2020. 15 homicides and 64 shootings and murders occurred in January alone of 2021, which was a 129% increase over January of 2020. Philadelphia PD, 33 million defund. According to new data from the Philadelphia Police Department, homicides were up 30% in 2021. There had been 412 non-fatal shootings in 2021, whereas there were only 258 in 2020. Portland, Oregon PD, 15 million defund amount. According to the most recent 2020 data from the FBI, the total crime rate in Portland is 5,748 per 100,000. That should be 100,000, I'm sorry. That is 132.8% higher than the national rate. San Francisco PD, 120 million. According to the most recent data from the FBI, the total crime rate in San Francisco is 6,175.2 per 100,000. That's 149.33% higher than national average. I won't read the figures now. You can see them. 122.74% higher than the total of 2,772.4 per 100,000 in 2020. So a significant increase in San Francisco. And then the final agency I'm covering is Seattle, a $69 million defund amount. And according to the most recent data from the FBI, the total crime rate in Seattle is 5,081 per 100,000. This is 105.5% higher than the national rate and 70.75% higher than the Washington total crime rate. So in the next several slides, I'll show the retirements and resignations in these same 10 cities. Baltimore, as of December 31st, 2020, Baltimore staffing fell below 700 sworn officers. This was 500 officers short of normal staffing levels and resulted in responding to emergency calls only. Chicago PD, the department, which was roughly 13,000 sworn officers, had 560 retirements in all of 2020, 475 in 2019, and 339 in 2018. So you can see a significant increase over those 2 years. Los Angeles, in just the 2020-2021 fiscal year that ended in June, LAPD saw 631 police officers from the ranks leave the department, many through retirement. That was nearly 100 more than left LAPD in the prior fiscal year. Minneapolis, in 2020, 105 officers retired or resigned. This is double the attrition rate of 2019. In addition, in 2021, 155 officers are on psychiatric leave and will not be available, and we'll talk about this in a later slide. New York, in 2020, 5,300 uniformed NYPD officers quit or submitted paperwork to retire. This is a 75% increase over 2019. Oakland Police Department has 80 unfilled positions. Philadelphia PD is 368 officers short, and the Deferred Retirement Option Program, which allows Philadelphia officers to declare retirement in the next 4 years, is 5 times higher than it was in 2020. Portland had 69 officers resign and 75 retire from April 2020 to April 2021 versus 27 and 14 respectively in the previous year. San Francisco PD had 23 officers resign in the first 6 months of 2020 and another 31 retired. Comparatively, only 26 resigned in 2019 and only 12 in 2018. And Seattle saw resignations increase 123 in 2020 from 34 in 2019, and retirements increased to 96 in 2021. So, clearly there's a correlation among cities which have defunded the police, a spike in violent crime, and police officer resignations and retirements. And my little diagram here shows you the kind of the flow chart here. Defund, increased violent crime, spike in police officer retirements and resignations. So was defunding of the police by these 10 cities the only possible cause of the spike in violent crime? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. And the answer is possibly, but there are other intervening variables that should be considered, probably not nearly as significantly as the defunding, but there are a couple of other intervening variables that we should look at. So summer months. So summer months traditionally show a spike in violent crime in the U.S., and this could possibly be an intervening variable as well, because most of the increases that we saw in 2020 and 2021 occurred during the summer months. COVID-19. So cooped up Americans who are angry certainly might be an additional explanation and intervening variable. So, however, considering the timing of the defund movement and the subsequent spike in retirements and resignations of police officers in these 10 cities, the most likely cause-effect relationship is the massive resignations and retirements, emboldened the opportunist criminal element to take advantage of the situation and commit both violent crimes and property crimes that would not have been committed otherwise. That's my observation. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, you remember when we were looking at the Minneapolis slide? So currently in Minneapolis, there are 150 sworn officers awaiting the retirement board's decision to grant their PTSD medical retirements. If approved, this would put the remaining officers in a precariously dangerous situation with virtually no backup. Moreover, it sets an unprecedented policy of allowing police officers to use the psychiatric disability, once only attributed to military personnel, to be applied to policing. Policing should be distancing itself from militarism and not associating with it. That's my opinion, and it certainly is one that we all should be concerned about. The PTSD phenomenon now being used and approved, by the way. The Minneapolis City Council approved this PTSD retirement for its officers well before the defund movement began. So rather than defunding the police, policing needs reform. So the culmination of much of the unrest of the 1960s, and maybe I'm dating myself here. I'm 75, going on 76. Maybe a lot of you who are viewing this video presentation weren't aware of all that took place in the 60s. Anyway, President Lyndon Johnson was president, and because of the riots that took place in the late 60s from about, well, not late, middle 60s from about 1965 to 68, rioting in the cities, he established the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice. And this commission was composed of some of the most prominent criminal justice practitioners and educators of this time. And their many recommendations were outlined in a publication titled The Challenge of Crime in a Free Society. So unfortunately, many of their recommendations, particularly for policing, were never implemented. So what I'm going to do is make some recommendations that will hark back to some extent on the 1960s and the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice. We're going to revisit at least one of the recommendations that the Commission made. So recommendations for police reform will be categorized in the following way: what has not worked and what has worked. So what has not worked in policing? And some of these you might find rather, ridiculous, I suppose, some attempts at reform. And I'll point those out that, to me seemed kind of silly at the time. But first of all, arrests for misdemeanors versus citations. Many district attorneys and prosecutors throughout the United States now are not prosecuting misdemeanors, and they are advising their police agencies to cite only, unless, of course, the person has several recidivist misdemeanor activities. Could be a reason to not cite, but first offense, maybe even second offense misdemeanors, probably a citation is in place. Recruitment of military without college degrees. This has been, police departments have relied on military people to fill their ranks for as long as I can remember. And it really hasn't worked. It really creates more a militarization of police departments. I'm not saying that that agency should not recruit military with it. But what I'm going to say in the next couple of slides, in the following slides, is that let's target military people with college degrees. That seems to be even a better combination. So, and now remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about what has not worked. Okay, not employing some degree of community policing. And I really don't have time or in this slide presentation to go into community policing. I think probably most of you have some, pretty good idea what community policing is. Not hiring minorities and women at a greater percentage than currently exists. Rating police officer performance that emphasizes arrests, citations, and other enforcement tactics. And the last slide is I hit the button too soon, but the last slide talked about the way too many laws on the books, particularly vehicle violations that really become ruses for police officers to use to make stops and then do searches and go from there. I was a police officer for 15 years in the city of Oakland, and I saw it there. Okay, in the 70s and 80s. Okay, Vehicle violations were used as a ruse to make a stop and then get into a search to look for guns, drugs, other things that the officers expected to find when they made the stop. That's got to stop. We got to get these silly, cracked windshield, license plate light burned out, those sorts of things off of the books. Okay, what has not worked continued? No-knock warrants. For those of you who don't know what a no-knock warrant is, a no-knock warrant allows officers who are particularly serving drug warrants for, suspected drugs is what they're going to search for. And the idea behind the no-knock warrants when they were approved years ago was that these suspects would run and dump the drugs in the toilet and flush them before the officers could get in. So they approved these no-knock warrants, and they haven't worked. Okay, they've caused, we see time and again officers breaking into homes in the wrong address. We saw in Louisville, Kentucky, with the shooting of the female, killed her when they were issuing, trying to get in on a no-knock warrant. So no-knock warrants probably need to go. Police officers wearing blazers and tie instead of a recognizable uniform. This occurred with the Menlo Park PD in 1968. It didn't go over very well, obviously. People couldn't recognize the officers. They looked like, college preppies from local Menlo College, which was close by, and Stanford University. So, it didn't work. Police Chief Charles Gain in the San Francisco Police Department in the late 60s, early 70s, he changed the black and white police cars to baby blue, thinking that would be a reform. It backfired as well. People couldn't recognize the baby blue police cars. And oftentimes when people are a victim of a crime, they go running out and try to look for a police officer right away somewhere. And what are they going to look for? They're going to look for a black and white, not a baby blue. Use of force policies that authorize potentially deadly force, such as the Minnesota neck kneel, I call it, which was, believe it or not, this was a use of force that was authorized by the Minneapolis PD when the officer was, quote, trained in this maneuver. But obviously we saw that didn't work. Okay, reforms that have or are working and will work into the future. Community policing. Again, I don't have time in this slide to go into detail on what community policing is. Hiring officers with college degrees. My best example here is the Arlington, Texas Police Department. It requires a college degree for even entry-level police officers. Many of the officers in the Arlington PD that have moved up in the ranks have master's degrees. And you never hear of anything coming out of Arlington PD that even smacks of, excessive use of force and all the other issues that we've seen, throughout 20 and 21. Diversity in hiring, and particularly hiring of female officers, and even more so female officers of color. Decertification of police officers for serious misconduct. So up until September 2020, my state here, where I live, California, was one of only 4 states in the nation that did not have a decertification law, but it does now. Senate Bill 2 gives the state's Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training the power to decertify an officer for wrongdoing. So for all intents and purposes, this law ends these officers' careers in law enforcement. It sets up a 9-member advisory board of civilians who, based on an independent investigation, can recommend to the California Post that the officer be decertified. This bill will end the possibility of an officer fired from one department only to reemerge in another. So reforms that are working continued. So one is leadership that values these what has worked principles. The death of the law enforcement, the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice And all of the great recommendations that were made in that document back in the late 60s got poo-pooed mainly because police leadership throughout the country opposed it. And at that time, police leadership in the U.S. was very powerful. I won't even go into some of the agencies or some of the groups such as the Police Chiefs Association, National Sheriff's Association, several others opposed it, and that was the death of those recommendations then. Hopefully, this has changed, and that leaders today, leadership in policing, sees that there's an extreme need for change, and that they're going to lead the way. So police leadership in the U.S. has not completely embraced these reforms, and until they do, there will not be the reform necessary to change policing for the better and possibly change policing before it is replaced by some inferior system. So, question. That ends my presentation. That's my email if you want to ask me about anything that you didn't understand or would like to clarify in this presentation. I'd be more than glad to respond to your email. So I'm going to stop it here. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I certainly appreciate it.